Some memories don't thin out with time, they thicken. They hold on to air and smell like coffee gone cold and a heater that never quite catches up. I don't scare easy, but I don't confuse fear with respect. I respect the kind of night that turns a highway into a black ribbon with a pulse. I respect the way a CB will sit there mute for hours, then lift its head right at midnight like it knows what you've got buried in you. Out here, most of us run with Channel 19 open, a habit as natural as checking mirrors. Breaker, and all that. High and by in a language you only learn by living 11 states in a week. It's not about chatter. It's about knowing someone's close enough to hear you if you whisper. I've heard tales since I started in this life. Phantom rigs, headlights that never pass, mile markers that double back on themselves the way a thought does at 3 a.m. Most of it I can explain. A lot of it you don't want explained. But there's a thin band of stories that won't sit still. They happen at the same hour or close enough to bite, and they come through the same way, not loud, not dramatic, just certain. A voice that shouldn't be there, saying a thing you don't want to hear and can't afford to ignore. You could shut the radio off. You could. Some do. But then the cab goes too quiet, and your own breathing sounds like weather moving in. You don't need to believe me. If I hadn't lived what I did, I might not believe me either. But I know 4 people who heard something at midnight, give or take a few minutes, and they don't run the same anymore. Same roads, same freight, same miles, different kind of silence riding shotgun. I asked if I could tell it. They all said the same thing without talking to each other. Say it like you heard me say it. Don't fix it, so I won't. I'll keep the static, the long pauses, the parts where the mind tries to do cleanup and fails. If you're listening, keep one hand on the wheel and one ear on that low hum. If the tone of it drops, just a hair, you'll know what I mean. Do you copy? Story 1. My name is Mark Elias. I'm 42, owner-operator now, Freightliner Cascadia that I keep cleaner than my first apartment. Before I was my own boss, I was a mechanic, the kind who could listen to a diesel idle and point to the hose that was 2 weeks from splitting. Nights are my choice. Always have been. Less traffic, less theater. You feel the country breathe. That spring of 2011, early spring the way Kansas does it. Fields asleep but restless, wind coming crosswise like a dare, I was rolling east on I-70. Tuesday, 12:14 a.m., somewhere near mile marker 247. Coffee lukewarm, half a sandwich left, radio parked on 19, just the comfortable hiss that makes you feel like you're not the last person alive. The wind nudged the trailer now and then, nothing you'd log, just enough to keep your grip honest. The road had that freshly washed look, no rain, but the kind of humidity that lets the paint lines glow under your highs. I tapped the dash once to wake my clock. It blinked 12:14, the colon steady, no stutter. I tell you that because of what happened next. Short fuse. It wasn't a call sign, it wasn't a hello, it was a certainty shaped like my name, not the one on my license. The other one. The ugly one you get when you've earned losing your temper at the wrong time. I jerked my chin toward the radio by reflex, not because I planned to answer. Nobody had called me short fuse in years, and nobody except a handful of people even knew I'd been called that. Not on the road, not on some Facebook memory. Private. The voice didn't carry like a sound, it arrived like a memory you didn't invite. Soft. Same way it always was when he was in a generous mood. Don't pass 248, kid. Pull to the shoulder. Now I didn't breathe for a second. Sandman. That was his handle. The first man who taught me how to work a clutch without making it complain. The guy who showed me how to check a hub by smell. He'd been gone 8 years. Coronary at home. I'd carried his casket 2 steps and couldn't feel my arms. I hadn't said his name out loud in at least 5. I looked for the joke first. That's how you stay alive and sane. Somebody knows you, heard a story, doing a bit. I scanned the mirrors. the lanes. Nothing but my world and the empty right lane stretching ahead like a promise. Crosswind caught my trailer hard enough to hum, a deep, low note that landed inside my teeth. "Breaker?" I said, hating how small it sounded. "Say again." The radio gave me that thready static you get when somebody lets up on their mic too soon. Then, "Short fuse. Pull over. Do it." Not a request. An order he'd given me in 2003 when I tried to make the pass on a blind curve because I was 24 and the universe hadn't yet told me no the right number of times. The dash clock froze between blinks. The colon held. 12 to 14. I didn't know I'd lifted my foot until the engine note changed and we started to slow. I signaled out of habit, even though there was no one to see. The shoulder came up steady, and I gave the rig the kind of gentle tug I give when I'm teaching myself I'm not afraid. Tires kissed the rumble strip. The world complained, then I settled. Neutral, brake set, flashers on. A breeze moved through the cab like somebody had cracked the passenger door and let March in. The heater had been on low and steady. Didn't matter. It smelled like hot metal anyway, that coppery bite you get when a bearing's unhappy. "Okay," I said, because talking to an empty seat is easier than talking to a dead man. "Okay, I'm pulled over. Now what?" The radio exhaled. That's the only way to say it. One long breath across the cones, and under it a string of numbers spoken too slowly to be an emergency and too fast to be coordinates. 7, 4, 2, 9. The rest stretched thin like tape that's been rewound too many times. There was a wetness to it, a damp-lipped sound I hated immediately, and I pictured his face after 10 miles of talking with a trucker's thermos coffee and menthol smoke in him. I reached for the high beams without knowing why and laid them down the lane. For a heartbeat, the reflective paint on the steel guardrail shifted. I know that sounds like nothing, like my eyes stuttered. Maybe they did. The bright stripes slid a fraction, as if somebody had peeled them off and put them back wrong. I blinked hard. Everything snapped back to geometry. Then, 50 yards ahead in the right lane, a recapped tire let go. Not a gentle peel. A hit. It kicked itself apart into zoological shapes and shrapnel and mean rubber like something alive. A piece big as a Labrador tumbled exactly where I would have been if I hadn't moved. My flashers put light on it, and for a second the ripped steel-belted heart of it shone like the inside of an old mouth. "Jesus," I said to no one. "Jesus." 10-4, the radio whispered. Barely there, not Sandman's tone. Too thin, or maybe just too far away. Then nothing. The low hiss again, the safe kind that says the world is ordinary and you are small inside it. I sat with my hands on the wheel the way you do when you want your fingers to remember how to hold. The dash clock blinked again, like a fish breaking the surface. 12:14 became 12:15, then 12:16, as if it had a right to decide when time applies. I pulled back into the lane after my heart decided to come with me, stopped at the next truck stop with a light that didn't make you feel like a suspect, ordered the coffee I didn't need, and asked a question I didn't want an answer to. "Anybody on 19 hear a Sandman about a tire?" Blank looks. A guy with a beard that told his whole week said, useful as he could, "Had a blown recap eastbound right lane. You the one who dragged it to the shoulder?" I shook my head. He shrugged at the universe's deep indifference and went back to the lottery tickets. Back in the cab, I checked the call log on the set out of habit. It tracks how long the channel's been open. It's a dumb feature until it saves you. There was a gap, a clean, stupid blank at 12:14, nothing recorded, like I'd switched off for a second. I hadn't. I don't do that. I don't switch off. I rolled again. The static at my elbow had a weight to it I didn't remember from 10 minutes earlier. Every so often it would drop half a tone, just enough to change how it lived in the air, and I would swallow and hear how loud swallowing can be. At 12:48, a whisper came across without carrier, just a ghost of sibilance braided together into something almost like a name. Short fuse, it said. Or maybe I invited that shape into it because I needed to hear a thing that would make it all line up. I answered. Of course I did. I said copy into a cab where I was the only person breathing. A man I love told me what to do, and I did it, and I hate that I don't know if it saved me from anything. I sleep fine most nights. I keep the radio on even when the road is so empty it feels locked. When the static sinks to that pitch, the exact one from that night, I find my thumb on the talk button before my mind catches up. I tell the dark I'm here, then I wait to see if it answers back. Do you copy? Story 2. I'm Renee Alvarez, 36 when it happened, hazmat certified, paperwork always in order, Kenworth T680 that I could park inside a chalk outline halfway between El Paso and nowhere. West Texas has a lot of miles that feel like the inside of a pause. This was August 2017. Heat like a thick hand on your chest all day, and then the night comes and you'd swear the temperature drops 2 degrees, but all it does is redistribute. 12:03 a.m. on I-10 near Sierra Blanca, no moon, the sort of sky that makes you feel like you forgot to pay the light bill for the whole county. I'd done my tricks at the last stop, walked the trailer check, put a hand on each tire, listened for the whisper that means trouble later. Seals intact on the tank, placards squared away, the little rituals that keep you alive and keep the inspector from writing you a sheet that ruins your Thursday. Channel 19 was a lullaby of road noise and an occasional eastbound, you got a bear at the 98 kind of thing. Someone up ahead mentioned Border Patrol checkpoint hours. I nodded like they could see me and took a sip of water that tasted like its own container. Music low enough to be a suggestion, just a bass line fading in and out when the reception slipped between mesas. The first odd thing was my own voice. Copy that. I hadn't said anything. My hand wasn't on the mic. But there I was, answering like a polite version of myself, coming out of the speaker next to my left knee. I laughed. That was my real first mistake. Laughing out here is like whistling in a place where sound doesn't belong. The radio gave me the soft scratch of an open key, and I lifted my mic to say what we all say when a reply gets chewed up by weather. Say again. But my voice beat me to it. Say again, I heard, exactly the way I would have said it. Same cadence, same mild irritation with the world for not doing what I asked the first time. It was like a delay line on a cheap soundboard, except the timing was wrong. It wasn't trailing me. It was a half-second ahead. A set of headlights showed up in my mirrors. Then 2 more. They resolved into 3 tractors with no plates. All 3 kept the same distance, a measured mathematical space that felt rehearsed. I moved a hair to give grace on the left lane, even though they weren't trying to pass, and they moved with me like we were tied together by invisible webbing. I tried a dumb test. I tapped my brake pedal twice, just enough to blink the lights, and all 3 rigs responded with a simultaneous, identical double blink. No variation, no lag. The hair on my forearms woke up like it had been asleep. Eastbound, you got company? Someone asked on 19, friendly enough. I keyed up and said, affirmative, 3 back. Only I didn't get to finish the sentence because the radio decided it liked me better when I didn't drive the conversation. Affirmative, 3 back, came through in my voice, over mine, under it, somewhere braided with it, not a mix, more like a statement of ownership. Then, together, in a low harmony that didn't match the day I'd had, 3 voices said, 10-4. I didn't know men could talk with the same throat, but apparently sometimes they can. I swallowed and pretended to be someone who hadn't already run through a dozen bad outcomes. Brake, brake, hazardous load, the radio said in my register. I hadn't keyed the mic. I hadn't thought the sentence. The words hung there like a wet coat, and I wanted to take them down before anyone else saw them. Out my right, the fence lights along a ranch line blinked out and then back in unison, like someone clapped exactly once. The air in the cab got that taste I remember from before a storm when the clouds have teeth. Ozone, sharp as a battery on your tongue. My left hand found the wheel's top like it was the only way to steer out of a thought. "Move to the outside," my voice told me. I didn't ask which outside. I slipped the Kenworth over a lane, blinkers on because manners count even when all you want to do is disappear. The 3 trucks behind me followed exactly. Their signal lights snapped on in a perfect chord, the same orange, the same beat. I looked ahead and saw it, a ragged fan of metal lying across the inside lane, shining dull like a tool somebody forgot in a bad place. Some bracket maybe, or a piece that popped off something bigger and went to live where it shouldn't. If I hadn't moved, I would have hit it clean and sent shards into the tank behind me. And maybe we're not talking because I don't get to anymore. You hazard this job with a calculator in your head, always. That evening, my arithmetic failed and something else did the math for me. I breathed out the way you do when you've been bracing, and I reached for the mic out of habit. "Thanks for the heads up," I started, because I'm the sort who says thank you even to weather. The 3 behind me answered together with a low, almost amused 10-4. Too perfect. No coughing, no background cab noise, no life in it. I felt watched, not by eyes, but by a level. I took the next chance to pull off, a wide shoulder slanting into scrub where the wind was its own animal. I let the 3 pass, except they didn't. They were gone. 1 minute, I had 3 obedient ghosts in the mirror. The next, I had stars and a road that pretended nothing had ever happened on it. I sat there long enough for my hazard lights to turn into a metronome I hated. When I was ready to be told I was crazy, I pulled into a toll plaza that probably sees more tired confusion than a therapist and asked about the last 15 minutes of my life. The attendant shrugged over a paperback and said the cameras had been glitchy. No record of me with company. "You're solo on the last shot," he said, doing me the kindness of not laughing. I wanted him to be right. I wanted cameras to be gods. Days later, another state, a different stretch of interstate that had nothing to do with deserts or fences or the smell of hot dust. 12:03 a.m. again. I wasn't watching the clock. I was watching the curve ahead and the way my right mirror made the world look like it might catch up. "Renee," my voice said, before I had time to decide what to be afraid of. It wasn't the flattening effect a cab can put on a sound. It was the sound of hearing your own name from a hallway you thought was empty. I picked up the mic and didn't press the button. I needed to know if the rules were still rules. "Stop looking in the mirror," my voice said, kind and irritated at once. Exactly the register I use when I drive past a car on his phone and I want him not to die. I didn't look for 5 miles. That felt like worship, and I don't know if that's the direction this thing deserved from me. I check my mirrors. That's what keeps a person like me in one piece. But when the hour moves close to that minute, and the night gets the texture of a dried-out washcloth, and my radio hum drops a little lower than physics says it should, I look forward and let the world behind me be whatever it wants. I don't know if I'm avoiding something, or respecting something, or being trained by a voice that wears my face. I've driven enough miles to believe in something like mercy. I've also lived enough nights to know I don't like it when the mercy sounds like me. I can handle fear. What unsettles me is the feeling that I'm a step behind my own mouth, that I'm not the one who answers first anymore. Story 3. Name's Hank O'Rourke. 58 when I finally decided to put this one in words. 30 years on the High Line, I could draw US 2 with my eyes closed and tell you where the black ice likes to lay flat and pretend it's honest. I keep an old Peterbilt 379 the way some men keep a piano, tuned by ear, cleaned like it matters. January 2004, a winter that bit from the side, just enough to keep you braced even when the plows had made a fair show. I was running east, somewhere north of Havre, the kind of land that lets the sky sit right down on your shoulders. 12:09 a.m., because I looked. I always look at the time when I get that itch, the one in the ribs that says pay attention or pay for it later. I had the heater doing its best attempt at a sigh, the fan noise steady. Channel 9 on the CB, not out of superstition, but because you don't flirt with Montana in January, and you don't pretend help isn't a thing you might need or be. I don't talk much on 9. None of us do. You leave it open for emergencies, for the moments when a voice will be more important than sleep. The windshield ate tiny needles of blown snow. The wipers clicked in a rhythm that made the night feel close. My hands were doing the old dance, 2 o'clock and 10 o'clock, a thumb checking the seam in the wheel from 1,000 miles ago. The body's rituals that tell you you're still the one driving. Then a child spoke up from the dark. He won't let me out of the closet. It wasn't a cute voice. It wasn't a movie voice. It landed flat and cold the way a fact does when it's been true too long. No carrier tone that I could pick. No pop of a key, no cough of a cab in the background, just that sentence arriving like it had always been traveling to me. I took a breath that felt like stepping into water. 10-9, I said before I knew I'd decided to say it. Say again. I can't turn the handle. He won't let me out. It smells like shoes, I should tell you this. Some of us carry a weight, and mine is that I've been to too many scenes where somebody's hurt and the house has a sound. I'm a widower, but that's not the part that matters here. The part is that I've spent nights repairing things with my hands so I wouldn't think about kids I couldn't fix. The radio had my number and didn't care that I didn't want to answer. "What's your 10 to 20?" I asked. "Where are you?" The voice gave me an address. Street name and number. Careful, like reciting something on the back of a faded index card. The hairs on the back of my neck did a small, honest dance because I recognized it raw. It was the old St. Bridget's home over in Havre, a building empty since the 80s, windows boarded, the kind of address that lives in a different decade. We used to run toys there on Christmas runs back when I was greener, and the world smelled like diesel and possibility. They closed it. Money went somewhere else, or hearts did. Whichever. "Is someone with you?" I said, steady. My breath fogged a tiny halo onto the inner edge of the side window. I wiped it with the back of my hand and frowned. The glass fogged again, fainter but in a shape. Small palms. 5 fingers. Right at the place where my sleeper opens into the cab. On the little window I always forget to clean because it's a reminder that I sleep surrounded by glass. "Don't turn on the lights," the voice said in the same bare tone. Not a plea, a rule. I reached for the panel switch out of habit to hit my spots and flood the snow around me with truth. I stopped a finger width short because I realized I didn't want to be disobedient to a ghost or a prank. The winters here teach you to take advice even if it smells strange. Out past the hood, the night had texture like breath. I eased off the throttle, checked my mirrors, which gave me nothing but my own regret looking back at me, and let the Pete drift into a wide pullout I've used 100 times when the road goes from straight to story. I set the brake and listened. The heater hiccuped in sympathy with my nerves. I clicked the CB to 19, just in case, then back to 9. The world outside was a postcard the wind had already licked. I stepped down into boots that have outlived 2 marriages and walked to the back of the trailer. The snow took my weight grudgingly and squeaked. Behind the trailer, sweet and clear, like something trying to play fair. Footprints. Small, bare, starting there as if the kid had been dropped by some careful hand and told to walk. They went 2 steps and then stopped mid-stride, toe poised like a thought, and there was no 3rd step, no drifted fill, no explanation. They started. They didn't go anywhere. I looked up without wanting to. Sometimes Montana gives you stars that seem like they're about to apologize. Sometimes it gives you a blank slate. This was the blank. Wind pushed a little, and the snow hissed on the trailer's aluminum. Bells threaded themselves into the radio static like someone had tied them there. Distant, tiny bells, not church ones like a town claims, not a cowbell with mud on it. More like the polite jingling I remember from the orphanage when the sisters walked the hallway at night and didn't want to frighten anyone. "Don't turn on the lights," the radio repeated in that small voice that had never learned how to lie. "Okay," I said to the empty road and whatever had my frequency. "Okay, we won't." I stood there with my hands too far from my pockets, an old man pretending he had a plan besides witnessing. The clock on my dash had an attitude, so I stepped back into the cab and looked at it like we were enemies trying to remember why. 12:09. The colon pulsed, the heater cut for a breath the way older systems do when they've decided you should respect them. The radio crackled a long, droning hush and then died. Not faded, not weakened. Died. A switch flipped somewhere in the unseen guts of it, and I sat in a box full of my own breath and the old smell of coffee and fear. I counted. I didn't mean to. The mind does numbers to keep the bad away. I counted to 60 in the old cadence my wife used when she taught me to breathe again after the heart attack I pretended wasn't coming. On the beat of 60, the radio woke as if nothing had happened. The heater exhaled what heat it had held back. The world had the gall to be ordinary. I tried the old orphanage address on the cops the next day, because there's still a little part of me that believes telling someone with a badge makes a thing less crazy. The deputy was kind enough to let me feel foolish without making me do paperwork. "You get weird skips out there on the High Line," he said in a voice with too much familiarity to be dismissive. "Radio bounces off heaven sometimes. Be careful," I smiled the way you smile when a person tries to hand you a blanket made of words. Every January 12th since then, at 12:09 a.m., no matter where I am, no matter if it's Missouri or Maine, the radio in my Pete goes dead like a heart remembers to stop for exactly 60. I've had newer sets put in, switched brands, replaced fuses for the theater of it. Begged a guy with hands smarter than mine to chase a gremlin that won't sit still. Doesn't matter. The clock keeps beating. The radio takes its minute. And every now and then, just before it dies, I see a pale fog on the sleeper window in a shape I don't want to learn by heart. I've learned to like the noise of a storm, the way it wraps around you and pretends you're not alone. What I can't stand is the thin silence that lives between one word and the next from that voice. I'd take the whole blizzard over that hush. Do you copy? Story 4. I'm Tasha Green, 29 when I switched chairs from dispatch to driver and found out being the voice on the radio isn't the same as being the one who needs an answer. I run a Freightliner M2, medium box, nothing flashy, just stout enough to respect a crosswind and nimble enough to make tight city docks look like an honest day. Bridges don't bother me. You learn their moods if you pay attention, the way a suspension groans when heat drops, the way steel sings when weight finds it. July 2019, midnight exactly. Delaware Memorial Bridge. The one that looks like it's holding its breath while the river slips under, carrying stories to the bay. Humid night, air stuck to skin, salt hanging around as if the sea had come up the stairs to listen. I had the CB open on 19 for the wind advisories. The bridge gets touchy about gusts across. The traffic app told me a clean run. My hands did the little superstition I learned from watching drivers who'd lived longer than my patience. A tap on the dash. A glance at the clock as if it could talk back. 12 a.m. split itself into 2 zeros and gave me nothing to argue with. The river below was a dark hyphen. The cables ahead caught the truck's own hum and fed it back to me like a choir too tired to pretend. The voice that came through wasn't ours. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is..." The name was clear enough to feel wrong. A freighter lost 44 years back. A story I'd heard over late coffee at a dispatch desk from a man who read shipping news the way some people check box scores. The frequency didn't belong to the CB world. The tone had ocean in it, long-distance salt and skip, that hollow you get when voices are traveling through more than wire. The call sign came once, perfect, like an obituary with good grammar. Then the static braided itself with something like wind over a mic, and the river got louder in my ears. I told myself what any sane person would. Interference, reflection. The particular joke the air plays on steel when heat rolls around and thinks it's a magician. I dipped my hand toward the volume, but a cold wetness found the panel first. Not droplets, not a spill. A film, like somebody had breathed gently on the plastic and left weather there. I touched it, and my finger came back tasting salt. The cab was sealed. The AC was on its moody trickle and doing a passable job. The smell of low tide slipped in like a cat through a door you didn't open. "Requesting greater clearance," another voice said, clipped and clipped again by distance. "Hard to port," someone barked, not to me, but to a deck where the only men left now are photographs pinned under magnets on kitchen refrigerators that learned how to wait. On the bridge, the lights along the spans dimmed as if the power had inhaled. I don't say that as poetry. They actually went down a notch, then held, the cables going up to the towers, printed shadows as straight as truth. I was at the start of the main span when the river under me pressed a little harder at the world. You know when reflective surfaces stop playing and start doing math? The steel in the central span gave me numbers. Not big, not glowing, just the kind of coincidence your brain notices and wishes it hadn't. 2 digits on one beam, 2 on the opposite, faint from the way my lows and highs hit the angles. Coordinates if you're the sort who keeps charts in your glove box for fun. I'm not. I knew enough to recognize a pattern and hate it. The CB hissed like the ocean had grown teeth. "Answer for them," the radio said. Not a ship voice now. Not a man who's worked a deck until his hands turned into rope. A woman, not me, and not me. A register that rides the same line dispatch lives on. "You're on the span," she said. "Answer for them." "Breaker 19, I said, stupid and brave, keys in my hand, heart on the smaller side of my ribcage. "Go ahead." The other frequency, the old one, the planet one, kept rolling. "Taking water forward." Repeat, "Taking water forward." The river under the bridge somehow reached my cab without permission and left a chill in the muscles along my shoulders. The cables hummed a lower note like the bridge had decided it needed to be part of the conversation. I mouthed a silent no, because I didn't want to be the person who thought bridges had ears. I kept my lane, kept my speed, did the exact things the signs beg you to do when machines have to share a narrow air. "Hold your course," the woman in the radio said, and my stomach learned what a drop feels like without the rest of me moving. "Say it," she added, not unkind. "Hold your course," I repeated, and felt absurd and then not. It's a sentence meant for water, but steel heard it just fine. I eased off the wheel's death grip and felt the box settle in its lane like a patient animal. Trucks around me existed in the way the horizon exists, as a fact, not as company. A gust walked the span. My hands corrected without thinking. On some deck in some year, men ran and yelled and someone did math about buoyancy wrong and gravity, and the Delaware swallowed a lot and the river kept its secrets like rivers do. By the time I hit the downslope and the concrete changed the way the sound lives in your tires, the smell of ocean let go the way a stranger leaves a room without making a noise. The film on the panel had turned to a faint tack I wiped into a dry smear. I drove into New Jersey pretending nothing had happened because pretending is an art. At the next stop, an older guy asked me how the wind was on the bridge, and I told him it had a mood. He nodded like he could sell me a weather report with a side of therapy. "They used to say she talks back," he said, not specifying who she was. "Some things take a pronoun because grammar's too small." Days later, I came back through. Different hour, wrong shape of dark. Nothing. Clean run, no memories. Then the week moved, and life made its little loops, and I found myself again at the start of the span, exactly midnight. My hands did the little tap I can't seem to stop, and the radio decided it remembered how to be a museum exhibit. Mayday, 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 the ocean said from 1975. The woman in the speaker asked me to answer for them, like I was some small debt collector for history. Bridges collect conversations, I think. Steel keeps vibrations long after we stop believing in the science of how. Sometimes I imagine there's a place downriver where the words that didn't get heard are sleeping in the mud, still shaped like themselves, waiting for a mouth that matches. I haven't found a way to be okay with the idea that a truck can be that mouth. But if a night is humid enough and a clock's zeros line up, I hear a ship call through a road made for tires. I tell it to hold its course like orders are a rope that can pull a deck up out of the river. And I drive the span, and the bridge hums back, and the lights dim just enough to see my own reflection in the driver's window, wet-eyed and furious. I don't believe in signs. I believe in loads and schedules and the ethics of showing up. But some midnights, the bridge feels like a throat that learned how to keep other people's last words. I cross, and it holds them. That's the deal we seem to have made. Do you copy? I don't know what this all adds up to. I'm not trying to sell you on anything except the fact that night has rules you only learn when the day stops telling you what to think. 4 drivers working 4 different miles on 4 different years, all hearing something they couldn't set down after. A dead mentor who said a name he had no business saying. A convoy that answered in one voice and wore my mouth. A child who knew an address that emptied out before he could grow into a bigger voice. A bridge that remembered a ship and needed a stranger to answer. Maybe you can glue it into one thing that makes you feel safe. I can't. I think about the timing more than I should. 12 to 12:14 a.m. isn't witching hour in any book I've read, but it's a seam. It's where today and tomorrow don't know who's supposed to knock. The CB hum drops a half flight of stairs around then. Fine. Maybe it's the ionosphere. Maybe it's fatigue in a wire. When I lay the stories next to each other, what I see isn't horror. It's obligation. A set of calls that didn't care whether we had room for them. A question, repeated in different throats, that has only one honest answer, even if you don't like it. You could say it's just radio. Skip, reflection. Bleed from a ship band that decided to be a road band because the night was humid and the steel was bored. You could say these are tired minds trying to make poetry out of nonsense. You can call us liars. It wouldn't be the first time I've been called something that didn't help. What I know is this: we've all driven with the radio off since, just to see if that would give us a say. We all turned it back on. There's a silence out there that doesn't feel like rest. It feels like the lead up to a word. If the right voice calls you at midnight, if it knows your wrong name, if it asks you to make a lane change you'd rather not, if it says don't turn on the lights, if it uses your mouth, if it asks you to answer for people you never met, do you answer? I do. I hate that I do. And I'll keep doing it because finally, after all these miles, I've learned that some debts don't get settled with money or time. They get settled by keeping your hand on the wheel and your ear on a hum that dips half a tone. The last question you hear will be gentle. It will be the same one I've been asking you this whole time. Do you copy? Since that first night, the quiet weighs heavier than any scream I've heard on the road.